bosses. Welcome to day 4 of the Boss Up Your Podcast Management Series. If you've been following me all week long, all week long we're talking about bossing up your podcast management process. Now, right. So tonight we're talking about podcast production. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. The day before we talked about podcast planning and podcast recording, but the last part that I won't say drive people away from podcasting or running their own podcast, but a lot of people, I said in earlier episode that podcasting is a long game. Well, a lot of people really don't make it past 10 episodes, especially if they're the ones that are doing it themselves. It's a lot of statistics I will show you. Most people don't make it past episode 10, especially if they're doing it themselves. But the reason why is because, as we'll get into, all the things that go into podcast production. So it's not just plugging in a mic, recording, and then editing audio, right? You also have to promote it. You also have to, share it on your social media platforms. You also have to create so we're going to get into it, right? So first is the editing. That's one of the first things that I do in my podcast production process. And that includes editing the video and editing the audio. Now, I told you guys the tools that I used yesterday for my editing is Windows Live Movie Maker. I use that to edit my videos, and for audio I just use the program Audacity because those are really easy to use. They're both free tools if you're looking for an option for video and audio editing. The other thing that you have to consider if you're going to start producing your own podcast or you're producing somebody else's is graphic designs. So Canva, if you've not heard of Canva, get your life together. Canva is something that you can use, and it's very easy for graphic design work, for social media, and for, basically anything, right? Because they have most of the templates that you need for most about everything. But graphic design work that you'll need for your podcast is, one, your podcast cover, two, your social media posts for Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever you're posting your podcast. The other thing people don't consider, not everybody does anyway, some people realize it, is that you can have separate covers for your episodes that are different from your podcast cover itself. So what I do is, if I have a guest on a particular show, I don't use the regular podcast cover. I actually use the podcast graphic that I get from the guest, and I put it on the cover for their episode. So it's a different episode cover, especially for when you have guests. But Canva lets you do all that. I think I can't remember any other tools because I just use Canva the most. But there are other tools out there if you're looking for some kind of social media graphic design tool. There are plenty of options out there. The other thing that you have to consider is copywriting and show notes. So when you have a podcast episode, you have to write some type of podcast description when you're uploading or publishing your episode. So that's one part of the copywriting. The second part is show notes. Now, if you have your own website where you're publishing your podcast episodes, you definitely need to have show notes. You need to have links to the resources that you talk about in the episode. If you have a guest on, you need to actually have links to their websites, or if they're offering a freebie for your audience, you need to have the link for that freebie in your show notes. And then you should also have a little description about the episode itself, what they're gonna hear in this episode, or something that entices them to want to listen to the episode. And in my show notes, I actually have on the webpage itself the audio player so that they can listen to it, and then I also have the video, the YouTube video that they can watch, so they have the option of listening to it or just watching the video. Which takes me into the website editing. Now, if you are hosting on a platform and you're not publishing it on your own website, then you don't have to worry about the website editing part. But if you are also posting your podcast episodes on your website in addition to wherever you're hosting it, and you can also host it on your website, that's an option too. But if you are publishing it on your website, that's the other thing that you need to learn. For me, I have WordPress on my website, and I actually created a template that I use. So every time I have a new podcast episode going out, I just grab my template, I plug in the exact same spots that I have to update every time, and then just keep it moving. So that makes it a whole lot easier, especially if you're going to do the same thing every week or every other week. Just creating that template on your website, and all you have to do is go in and update it, because that makes people's lives easier. It makes my life easier, I tell you that. What else? Audiograms. So another thing that you can have as part of your podcast production process is creating audiograms. Now, there are a lot of systems out here that you can use to create your audiograms. Headliner is one of them. Headliner is what I use. The only thing about a Headliner is that you have to wait until you publish the episode before you can get like the Headliner. They have a way that they create like automatic post for your podcast, automatic audiograms, but it only happens if your podcast is published. Now, if you're looking to have these audiograms prior to when you publish the episode, like you want to just have it ready and available, you're going to have to create them yourself in like some video editing tool. But if you have the patience to wait for Headliner, as soon as the episode's published, see, that's part of the reason why I publish my episodes like probably really late at night. So by the next day I would have that Headliner, and then the next day it's when it's publishing and people are seeing it in the morning before they're getting ready to get in the car and they listen to the episode. So I also have the Headliner coming in at that same time. Alright, so all those things I mentioned, like how much time did I run down? That was like 7 minutes of stuff, right? And you have to do that for every episode. And this is one of the reasons that people are kind of turned away from actually doing podcasts, because there's all this other stuff that comes with it outside of just, hitting play and recording. There is so much more that is inside of podcast production outside of just recording an episode. So hopefully I didn't just turn you away from producing your own podcast, but just know that it's a lot. Like I said, it's a long game. Having a podcast or creating a podcast is not like this short thing where you're going to just get 1 million listeners as you hop into it. It's an entire process. So if you have questions on any of the things that I talked about today, yesterday, and Tuesday, just drop them in the comment. Just DM me. Like I said, I have my own podcast now. This is season 2. I've had my podcast since 2020. We're about to be on episode like 55 or something like that. But the new season starts in September, because right now all I'm doing is interviews, scheduling interviews, recording interviews so that I can get them ready for September, October, November, December. Because that's how I do it. I batch record all of my stuff earlier in the season. Well, not early in the season, while I'm in the off season, and then I prepare the episodes for when I go live. Well, not go live, but my podcast season, which starts in September. So I have 2 podcast seasons, a fall and a spring. Because I take a break in the summertime, and then I take a break at the end of the year during the holiday times. So that's a podcast life. If you're thinking about podcasting, just remember the 3 important areas that you need to focus on or think about is planning your podcast, your podcast recording, and your podcast production. Okay? And if you need help with any of that, you can always DM me and I can give you some tips. Or you can hire like a podcast virtual assistant. That's something that I also do, or some services that I also provide in addition to, project management and regular virtual assistant. So this is it for our Boss Up series. I may hop on tomorrow. So one time for the bosses, boss up and change your biz.